Assalamu alaikum. Dear students, this is me, Ms. Madhya Rahman, the teacher of the Smart School Sir Syed Ahmed Khan campuses and Gulistani Johar campus. I welcome you all to your grade 5 science lecture. We are continuing our chapter 4, that is reproduction in plants. We are going to study how plants are reproduced and what are the facts and new things that we can learn in this chapter. The topic we are going to cover in this recorded lecture is methods of pollination. Now, in the name of Allah, Rabbi Zidni Ilma, Rabbi Zidni Ilma, Rabbi Zidni Ilma. O my Lord, increase me in knowledge. Pollination. Pollination is the transfer of pollen grains from anther to stigma of the same flower or enter another flower of the same kind. Now, what is pollination? When the transfer of pollen grains is done from anther to stigma. We studied the parts of flower. So, when the pollen grains are transferred from anther to stigma of the same flower or another flower of the same kind, it is called pollination. Yes, now there are two types of pollination. First of all, let's clear the concept of pollination. Pollination is transfer of pollen grains from anther to stigma. From anther to stigma, that is pollination, when pollen grains are transferred from anther to stigma. Now there are two types of pollination: self-pollination and cross-pollination. As you can see in the picture, let us discuss self-pollination. We have one flower. Now number one is pollen, number two is stigma, number three is anther. Now when the pollen is being transferred from anther to stigma of this own flower, of the same flower, it is called self-pollination, meaning the pollination is happening within the flower itself. एक ही फ्लावर के अंदर pollination हो रही है when pollen is being transferred from anther to stigma. Now, cross-pollination. What is cross-pollination? When the pollen from anther of one flower is transferred to stigma of another flower, mean the flower should be of same kind. If we are talking about rose, then it should be rose. Both of the flowers should be rose. So when pollen from one anther is transferred to stigma of another flower is called cross-pollination, meaning we are having two flowers of the same kind in this pollination system. So there are two types of pollination: self-pollination and cross-pollination. Now we are going to study how pollination is done. Methods of pollination: insect pollination and wind pollination. There are other ways as well, but in our textbook there are these two topics, so we are going to discuss these two in detail only. Methods of pollination are two ways: insect pollination and wind pollination. Let us start with insect pollination. Pollination by insect. Many flowers use colors to attract insects. Some have ultraviolet marks that can be seen by insects but are invisible to human eyes. Some flowers have scent to attract insects. Many of these scents are pleasing to humans too, but not all. Some flowers attract flies with the smell of rotting meat. Colors can't be seen in the dark, so scent is important for flowers that are pollinated by night-flying insects such as moths. So how pollination by insects are done? That flowers are very colorful, they attract insects, they have very different kind of skin that attract insects, so insects get attracted to the flower and then they carry the pollen from there to another flower. That's how pollination by insects is done. Now we are going to see what are the flowers characteristics that are insect pollinated. The characteristics of insect pollinated flowers are as follows. They have large brightly colored petals to attract insects. They are often sweetly scented to attract insects. Scented means smell, so they are very sweet in smell that attracts insects. They usually contain nectar to attract insects, meaning they have their juice, the flower juice that attracts the insects to come to that flower. They usually contain nectar to attract insects. They have moderate quantity of pollen because there is less wastage than wind pollination. When we will study wind pollination, you will know that some pollens are being wasted in wind pollination, not in insect pollination. Their pollens are often sticky or spiky to stick to insect. Their stigma is inside the flower so that the insect brush against it. Their stigma has sticky coating so that pollens can stick to it. Example, rose, white pea, hibiscus. So now we have the examples of pollinated flowers, that are rose, sweet pea and hibiscus. Now these are the characteristics of flowers that are being pollinated by insects. So some of the characteristics that you need to remember are that they have large brightly colored petals. The petals of the flowers are large in size and they are very colorful. They have nectar inside them. They have sweet scent of the flower to attract insects, and they have moderate quantity of pollen. Their pollen is sticky and the stigma is inside the flower so that the insect will rub against it to get the pollen on its body. These are the characteristics of insect pollinated flowers. Now we will do wind pollination. Now wind pollination. Grasses are wind pollinated. Pollination by the wind is very hit and miss. Hit and miss means that sometimes it is very good, sometimes it is not good. The wind may pick up pollen from a grass flower and scatter it all over the place. Only by chance will a little pollen land on another flower of the same species. Wind pollinated flowers tend to have small dull colored petals, or in the case of grass, no petals at all. Now why wind pollination is hit and miss? Because we need to transfer the pollen from one kind of a flower to another flower of the same kind. एक ही तरीके के दोनों flower होने चाहिए. So when the pollen are scattered, wind take up the pollen and they travel through wind to another flower, but it is a very rare chances that it will land on the same kind of a flower. It will land on the same kind of a flower, so it is a very less chances of that. That is why the pollens are mostly wasted in wind pollination. And what are the characteristics of pollination plants? We will see now. They have small petals, often brown or dull green, because there is no need to attract insects. They produce no scent and nectar. There is no need to attract insects. The pollens are produced in great quantities because most of these do not reach another flower. Their pollens are very light and smooth so that they can be blown in the wind. Their anthers loosely attached and dangle out to release pollens into the wind. Their stigma is feathery or net-like to catch the drifting pollens. Examples: sugarcane, grass, cereal plants such as maize, wheat, and rice. Now they are not very attractive flowers. They have very small petals, dull colors, because they do not need to attract insects towards them. They do not produce any scent meaning smell, and they do not also produce any nectar, so because they do not need to attract any insect. And the pollens are produced in great quantities. Why? Because they travel through wind and most of the pollens get wasted in the wind, so that is why they produce a very large quantity of pollens. Their pollens are very light and smooth. Like in insect pollinated flowers, the pollens was very sticky, but wind pollinated flowers have very light and smooth pollens, and they can easily be blown by the wind. Now, the example of wind pollinated flowers are sugarcane, grass, cereal plants such as maize, wheat, and rice. So these are some of the examples of wind pollinated flowers. I hope that this lecture had helped you to understand the pollination, methods of pollination. There are other ways as well, but in our book we have studied only two, that is pollination by insect and pollination by wind. We also studied the characteristics of flowers that are pollinated by insect and flowers that are pollinated by wind. You just need to remember some few basic characteristics, not all, on your fingertips, and you should also memorize the difference between self and cross pollination. I would like you to read this topic in your textbook to clear the concept so that we can further discuss in our live classes if you have any issues. Till the next video, this is me, Miss Madia Rahman, signing off. Allah Hafiz.